Today we're going to talk about competitive analysis and awareness of prior work, or kind of due diligence in research. And this is one of these things that people often misuse this sort of term to refer to when they're just playing games, right? They're a developer and they want to play some other games. They're like, oh, I'm researching, and yeah, kind of, sort of. We're talking about a little more seriously than that as to when you're doing something. If it's a platformer with a gravity mechanic, if it's an FPS with a puzzle weapon, whatever kind of game you're designing, being aware of what's come before you in that domain. And the reasons for this are manyfold. In terms of competitive analysis, it has to do with when can we learn something based on what someone else has already done. And in much the same way as a prototype saves us from going the wrong way on a long-term project, a competitive analysis can help us realize someone else already tried the thing we were thinking of, didn't pan out great, and either decide to steer away from at least the way that they did it, or figure out what should we have done differently. You know, we can benefit from effectively the hindsight of after the project was done. Anybody, including them, might be able to look at it and say, oh, if we get to start this all over, here's how we might have approached our problem space differently. Another reason for the value of knowing prior work, or prior art, as it's sometimes referred to, is just this context of not wanting to be naive, not thinking you're inventing something that it turns out has been done many times before. Among the experimental games community, this is incredibly common, where lots of people who are doing a game jam-sized game, a one-button game, a puzzle game, whatever you name it, think it's, they didn't hear about it from somewhere else, and so they think that it's original from them. Well, the reality of it is it's probably been done dozens, if not hundreds of times before. They just didn't really do any digging at all to try to find an example of where someone had done that. And it's usually, it really depends on where and why we're bringing this up, but occasionally comes up in situations where it's a case, again, we could have learned from what they did if only we were aware of it. It becomes a situation where we don't want to sound just oblivious if we're giving a conference talk about something that we think we invented, and it turns out that, someone else has done this before. It just helps to be able to give those shout outs to acknowledge awareness of, there's a precedent to this kind of thing. It doesn't mean you're unoriginal to be aware of the old thing. It doesn't mean that you're copying work to be considering the work of others when you're building something. And also, an invaluable thing to keep in mind about competitive analysis or prior art is that it's not like infinitely applicable across all things, right? Every game that we play isn't really researching game playing any more than every song a musician listens to necessarily informs the style of music that they work in. Instruments that they play, the kind of tunes, pacing, tempo, band size, you name it. You can still learn some things from it, but in a very general sense, as opposed to if you're really trying to learn and understand from patterns of what's been working for others, of what people respond well to, of being able to kind of pay attention to, again, learning from others' mistakes, and just not seeming out of the loop, like we've been kind of hiding off in some corner, fooling ourselves into feeling like we are the originators. So many things that we think are original ideas that we're having, they're like a byproduct in parts of kind of things around us. Of little deviations from currently popular games, of maybe mechanics that are partly inspired by something in a popular movie, of something that is just kind of in the air. Zeitgeist is the expression, right? And so because that often it's like, not only are we not the only person who's maybe working on that problem, and that's fine, but other people have probably beat us to it at least a little bit, and you want to try to figure out, okay, again, am I aware of them? Are they on my radar? And actually, I'll throw in another reason, even though I've said mainly focus on those two. Another reason why it can be valuable to find those kind of examples is because occasionally what begins as competitive analysis, or what might find the form of just being aware and alert of prior art so you don't sound like you're just naive when you're giving a talk at a conference or something. A third possibility is realizing there's an opportunity there for partnership. That someone else tried in this domain, has experience in this area, cares about this puzzle space or problem space, and it didn't go the way they wanted either, maybe. But they may, because of that, have experience and foresight that otherwise you may not from your position. And if you're still coming at that problem from a new angle, if you have a different solution to the problem, they may be open to the possibility of working out a way to work together on it to arrive at a solution better than what you could have done alone. Because you've automatically been able to find someone else who has, again, invested mental energy, time, effort, care, time out of their lives to work on that space through doing a little bit of competitive analysis, a little bit of homework, a little bit of digging, a little bit of asking around of like, hey, does anybody know of a game that does such and such? And I was actually impressed when in my little bit of time in Silicon Valley with the startup scene, the degree to which at like local meetups, there'd be businesses that were very much in the same competitive space, talking surprisingly openly about strategies or things or customers or discoveries or otherwise, because really they kind of viewed themselves collectively as a community of they were trying to battle these problems together of if any of them could solve it, it would help all of them. If, they all try to sort of hide and keep to themselves, they'd all be at a big disadvantage compared to somebody who doesn't have those local connections like Silicon Valley does. Or, like I talked about the other day in the other video, even if it's an online community, people you can be open with, people you can feel like we're on the same side, people can feel like even if either of us succeeds, we both improve each other's odds if we work together. Then if we're always trying to have this attitude or mindset of each person for themselves, has to invent things for themselves, has to do things out of whole cloth, most good things that we like, movies, music, books, art, otherwise, we're not the first in their tradition, we're not the first of their genre, we're not the first attempt to do what that particular work excelled at. And I think it's important accepting that to realize that there's perfectly valuable merit to, like I say, finding past examples, building upon those, learning from those, and just making sure that you're not one of these people who is totally out of the loop on the fact that, like, you're not the first person to think of that thing. That's worth doing. So that's it for today. I want to thank you, as always, for tuning in. You know what? I'd be curious to down below. And especially, again, let's do one of these things where you link it and all for these next few days. Clear. Normally get spam filter caught, but I'll clear those. Link us to if there's a game you worked on that you did some competitive analysis on and actually found that someone had worked on a kind of game before that's got some things in common with the game you're building. And, I'd be curious to hear, like, a link to the other game, if you can, or at least the title of it. The title of your game that you wind up building, or link to it. And then, kind of discussion of what similarities you found, what you learned from comparison, what critique you brought to it. And it's fine to be critical without being negative. Right? It's not destructive. It's saying, well, they did this, and I think it should have been this way, so that's what I tried to do. Or, as always, if you're following along these videos and you're not a game developer, but you're a musician, you're a painter, you're a writer, whatever, I'm equally interested in hearing about those stories down below as well. I know a lot of these same patterns appeal to many different lines of what people do. Or if you're a business person, let us know about how you did some competitive analysis, figure out who's failed in this domain, how can I not make those same mistakes. Thank you once again. I have another video for y'all tomorrow. Bye for now.